Matthew, we've discussed how we got to the disclosure regulation that we're at right now.
Yes.
Now there's a lot of questions about the draft or the final draft that exists as it is.
Definitely.
One of the questions that's being asked is who's included in the regulation?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, Mary, because there's a lot of confusion about who's included and who's not included. If you look at the draft of the regulation right now, all producers who are required to be licensed in the state of New York are included in the draft. There is, however, an exception for those producers who do not have a direct sales or solicitation contact with the purchaser. Contrary to, I think, a lot of popular opinion out there, however, there is no specific exclusion for direct sales writers or captive agents in the draft. And to that point, PIA is making sure that the draft handles and deals with all producers equally across the board.
So can you explain what the regulation requires producers to do?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Essentially, it's a two-step process. The first is a primary, or what we like to call a boilerplate disclosure process that's required to be furnished at a certain point in the sales transaction process. And then from there, depending on whether the consumer asks for additional information, secondary disclosure may be required as well.
And what does the primary disclosure contain?
The primary disclosure is actually pretty simple. It's 4 points. It's identification of your role as a producer. That basically says I'm selling you an insurance policy. I also have to tell you that I may make money or compensation based on the sales of that policy, that your compensation may differ depending on the policy that you choose. And if you have questions about that, then go ahead and ask me, and I'll be happy to provide it to you. That can be provided both orally or in writing, depending on your personal preference. But if it's done orally, at some point it needs to be provided in writing as well.
And after that preliminary disclosure, if the customer asks for more?
Correct. If the customer asks for more, then it triggers what we call a secondary disclosure. The secondary disclosure would actually be a disclosure of the amount of compensation that you will receive based on the sale of that policy, and a description of any alternative quotes that you present. There's also a requirement for disclosure of any material ownership that you have in the carrier or that the carrier has in you as a producer, and also something that the PIA pushed very hard to put in there, a disclosure or a reiteration of New York's anti-rebating laws, which makes it clear, I think, to the purchaser that I'm disclosing to you this information, but the state of New York law says that we can't talk about it, we can't negotiate it, and I can't change it.
So what format does the disclosure have to happen in?
It actually doesn't have a required format. As I indicated earlier, the original boilerplate may be done orally. If it's done orally, you have to follow it up with a writing. If it's done in writing, which it has to be ultimately, it can be as little as a few sentences long. And in fact, PIA is working right now to craft a boilerplate for our members to use that will be in full compliance and approved by the insurance department. But we're also cognizant of the fact that producers may want to do this in a number of ways. So we're making sure that the state insurance department, in promulgating and ultimately enacting this regulation, recognizes the fluidity of providing different forms of disclosure, different versions of that.
Can you talk about the timing of the two disclosures?
Sure, I'd be happy to. The timing of the first disclosure, the primary boilerplate disclosure, needs to be provided at or prior to the application for the contract that you're actually selling. That could be at any stage in the process. It can literally be as soon as they walk through the door, you could hand them a piece of paper and then you're done. It can be right up until the point of submission of the application for the policy that you ultimately choose. The secondary disclosure is only triggered if they ask for additional information. And if they ask for additional information, a secondary disclosure must be provided in writing, and it must be provided prior to the issuance of the contract. So after the coverage is already placed and bound, premiums are paid, at some point before you deliver that policy to them, then you need to provide the information they requested.
And do producers have to give the same boilerplate at the time of renewal?
No, actually, renewals are largely exempted. Renewals are entirely exempted from the boilerplate disclosure. At no point in time in a renewal, if it is a renewal, do you have to provide a boilerplate disclosure. There is a window, however, with respect to the secondary disclosure. If 30 days prior or 30 days following the placement of a renewal policy, the purchaser asks you about information related to that renewal, oh, by the way, how much money are you making on this renewal policy? Then you're required by the regulation to tell them that.
So our next step, our next video, we're going to be talking about what we're doing with the department. How can producers help you work with the department?
Again, same as I indicated in the first one, and that is, contact me with your questions or comments with respect to this. I think we've scratched the surface today, Mary, of a couple of the issues that have some widespread misconception out there. A lot of people think that renewals are in. A lot of people think that there's a lot more to do in the boilerplate disclosure. A lot of people think that certain carriers are exempted out of this. Our intent on that is, number one, to cure those misconceptions, to make sure that our producers really realize the scope of what this thing is requiring them to do. But also, in doing that, to give them a better conceptual framework to think about how they're going to implement this in their offices. And then, of course, to get back to us and say, okay, now I have a better understanding of exactly what I need to do on this thing, but in doing that, it raises this question or this question or this question. Please have them present those questions to me. I can bring them directly to the department. We are meeting with them regularly, almost on a weekly basis now, to discuss this, and we will vet out and get clarification on those issues.
And how can producers reach you?
Email is probably the easiest, or phone call. Phone call is easy. It's 800-424-4244, and email is govaffairs, G-O-V, affairs, all one word, @PIA.org.
Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you.